Isabella awoke tangled in silk sheets that felt more like chains, with the dreadful certainty that her life had been shattered beyond repair. What she didn't know was that the Supreme Alpha who had taken her by force was about to learn he hadn't kidnapped a mere human, but something far more powerful and dangerous. The taste of copper and earth filled Evelyn's mouth as consciousness clawed its way back to her. Blood, her own blood. The metallic tang mixed with the scent of damp moss and rotting leaves beneath her cheek, creating a nauseating cocktail that made her stomach lurch. She tried to move, to push herself up from the forest floor, but her body felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Pain lanced through her skull as she forced her eyes open, squinting against the filtered sunlight that pierced through the dense canopy above. Where was she? The question hammered against her temples with each heartbeat, but no answer came. Only fragments, flashes of running, of terror so pure it had stolen her breath, of something chasing her through the darkness. But what? And why? Her clothes hung in tatters around her body, the fabric of what had once been a cream-colored sweater, now stained with dirt and torn beyond recognition. Scratches crisscrossed her arms and legs, angry red lines that should have been screaming with pain, yet they felt oddly distant, almost numb. As she watched, mesmerized and horrified, the edges of a particularly deep gash on her forearm seemed to shimmer and pull together, the bleeding already beginning to slow. That wasn't normal, that wasn't human. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling with exhaustion she couldn't explain. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. Ancient trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost alive, their gnarled branches reaching toward her like accusatory fingers. This place felt wrong, old in a way that made her bones ache, as if the very air held memories of things better left forgotten. She needed to get home, wherever home was. The thought struck her like a physical blow because she couldn't remember. Not her address, not her apartment, not even what city she lived in. Panic rose in her throat, bitter and sharp, threatening to choke her. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to force the memories to surface, but they slipped away like smoke every time she reached for them. A branch snapped somewhere behind her. Evelyn spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have died away. In that suffocating quiet, she could hear something else. Breathing, low and controlled, coming from multiple directions at once. They emerged from the shadows like nightmares made flesh. The wolves were massive, easily twice the size of any normal wolf she'd ever seen. Their fur ranging from silver white to midnight black. Their eyes held an intelligence that was distinctly unnatural, and as they formed a circle around her, she realized with growing horror that they were coordinating their movements with purpose. These weren't wild animals acting on instinct, they were hunting with strategy. The largest wolf, its coat the color of storm clouds, stepped forward, its golden eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When it opened its mouth, she expected to hear a growl, a snarl, something animalistic. Instead, words emerged, spoken in a voice that was unmistakably human despite coming from a wolf's throat. "You don't belong here." Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. This couldn't be happening. Wolves didn't talk. They didn't form hunting parties with military precision. And they certainly didn't speak with the educated accent of a man who clearly came from wealth and breeding. She was losing her mind. The head injury, the memory loss, it had to be causing hallucinations. But then the impossible became routine as the other wolves began to shift and change before her eyes. Bones cracked and reformed, fur melted away to reveal human skin, and within moments, she was surrounded not by a pack of wolves, but by a group of very naked, very human men. The leader, now in his human form, was even more intimidating than he'd been as a wolf. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention even without clothes, he radiated an authority that seemed to press against her from all sides. His hair was the same storm cloud grey as his wolf coat, and those golden eyes hadn't lost any of their predatory intensity. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "What are you doing in our territory?" "I don't know," Evelyn whispered, hating how small her voice sounded in the oppressive quiet of the forest. "I don't remember how I got here. I just woke up and—" "You don't remember?" His tone was flat, disbelieving. How convenient. One of the other men, younger with auburn hair and suspicious green eyes, stepped closer. "She smells wrong, Darius. Not fully human, but not one of us either. Something else." Darius. The name fit him, strong and commanding. But what did they mean, she smelled wrong? What did they mean, not fully human? The scratches on her arms had stopped bleeding entirely now, and when she looked down at them, they appeared to be healing at a rate that defied medical explanation. "Please," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I just need to find my way home. I won't cause any trouble. I won't tell anyone what I saw here." Darius tilted his head, studying her with the kind of clinical detachment she might expect from a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "And where is home, exactly?" The question hit her like a slap, because she still couldn't answer it. Her memory was a blank slate, wiped clean of everything that should have defined her identity. She didn't know where she lived, where she worked, if she had family or friends who were looking for her. She was nobody, a ghost, haunting her own life. "I don't know," she admitted, the words tasting like defeat. "You don't know where you live. You don't know how you got here. You don't remember anything, but you happen to stumble into the most protected territory in 300 miles. Darius crossed his arms over his chest, the muscles in his shoulders shifting in a way that reminded her he could return to his wolf form at any moment. "Either you're the unluckiest woman alive, or you're lying to my face." "I'm not lying." The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by a sudden spike of anger that surprised her with its intensity. Where had that come from? She'd always been mild-mannered, hadn't she? The thought flickered through her mind before she realized she couldn't actually remember what she'd always been like. "I know how this looks, but I'm telling you the truth. I woke up here with no memory of how I arrived, and the first thing I see is a pack of wolves that turn into people. So forgive me if I'm having a little trouble processing the situation." The auburn-haired man, who looked like he couldn't be more than 25, let out a low whistle. "She's got fire in her. I'll give her that. Most humans would have fainted by now or be begging for mercy. Most humans can't heal the way she's healing," another man pointed out, this one older with silver threading through his dark hair. "Look at her arms. Those scratches were bleeding freely when we first caught her scent. Now they're almost gone." All eyes turned to Evelyn's arms, and she looked down to see that he was right. The angry red lines had faded to pink marks that would probably be completely gone within the hour. That definitely wasn't normal, that wasn't human. But if she wasn't human, what was she? "Bring her back to the settlement," Darius decided after a long moment of consideration. "Marcus will want to examine her. If she's truly lost her memory, there might be a way to recover it. If she's lying—" He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly clear. "I can walk," Evelyn said when two of the men moved to flank her. The last thing she wanted was to be handled like a prisoner, even though she supposed that's exactly what she was. "I'm sure you can," Darius replied with a smile that held no warmth. "But you'll walk where we tell you to walk, at the pace we set, and if you try to run, you'll quickly discover that wolves are much faster than humans, even humans who heal unusually quickly." The settlement, when they finally reached it after what felt like hours of walking through increasingly dense forest, was unlike anything Evelyn had expected. The buildings were constructed from local stone and timber, but there was an artistry to their design that spoke of generations of craftsmanship. Intricate carvings covered every surface, symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and dance in her peripheral vision. The air was thick with the scent of burning cedar and something else, something herbal and earthy that made her feel oddly calm despite her circumstances. People emerged from their homes to watch her passage, and she noticed immediately that they all shared certain characteristics. The men were uniformly tall and powerfully built, while the women had a grace and strength that suggested they were anything but helpless. Children played in the open spaces between buildings, but even they moved with a coordination and awareness that seemed beyond their years. Werewolves, Evelyn whispered, the word falling from her lips before she could stop it. Shapeshifters, Darius corrected from beside her. Werewolf suggests we have no control over our transformations. We are what we choose to be, when we choose to be it. They stopped in front of a building that was larger than the rest, its entrance marked by pillars carved with the images of wolves in various poses. Darius gestured for her to go inside, and she found herself in what appeared to be some kind of meeting hall. A fire burned in a massive hearth at the far end of the room, and the walls were lined with tapestries that depicted scenes she couldn't quite interpret. An elderly man sat in a chair near the fire, his hair completely white, but his posture still straight and strong. When he looked up at their arrival, his eyes were the same golden color as Darius's, but there was a depth to them that spoke of decades of accumulated wisdom. "Marcus," Darius said with a respectful nod, "we found her in the eastern woods, no memory of how she arrived, healing at an accelerated rate, and her scent is unusual." Marcus rose from his chair with the fluid movement of someone much younger and approached Evelyn. She had to resist the urge to step backward as he circled her slowly, inhaling deeply as if he could read her history through scent alone. "Fascinating," he murmured after completing his examination. "You're quite right about her scent. There's human in there, certainly, but something else as well, something old." He stopped directly in front of her, studying her face with unsettling intensity. "Tell me, child, do you dream?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean?" "Since awakening in our woods, have you had any dreams, visions, flashes of memory that might not be memory at all?" Now that he mentioned it, there had been something. Fragments of images that flickered through her mind when she wasn't trying to remember. A woman with her face but different clothes, standing in this very room. The taste of herbs she'd never eaten before. The sound of howling that filled her with longing instead of fear. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but they don't make sense. They feel like memories, but of things that never happened to me." Marcus exchanged a meaningful look with Darius. "They may be more real than you think. Tell me, child, what is your name?" "Evelyn." The answer came automatically, one of the few things she was certain about. "Evelyn," Marcus repeated, rolling the name around on his tongue as if tasting it. "And your family name?" That question hit the same blank wall as all the others. "I don't remember." Marcus returned to his chair, gesturing for her to sit on a bench nearby. "Darius, have you sent word to the other packs about our unexpected guest?" "Not yet. I wanted your assessment first." "Wise. This situation is more delicate than it appears." Marcus leaned forward, fixing Evelyn with that penetrating golden stare. "What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to accept, but I believe your memory loss is not accidental. Someone has deliberately blocked your access to your past, and they did it with considerable skill." "That's impossible," Evelyn protested. "Memory doesn't work that way. People can't just edit other people's minds." "Humans can't," Marcus agreed. "But you're not entirely human, are you? You've seen the evidence, the healing, the way you accept what should be impossible to accept, the dreams that aren't quite dreams. Something in you recognizes this place, recognizes us, even if your conscious mind doesn't remember why." The old man was right, and that terrified her more than the shape-shifting or the isolation, or even the possibility that she might never recover her memories. There was something familiar about the carved symbols, about the scent of cedar smoke, about the rhythm of voices speaking in harmonious conversation. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. "What am I?" she asked, the question barely above a whisper. That, Marcus said with a smile that was both kind and deeply sad, is what we need to discover. But I can tell you this much. Your arrival here is not coincidence. Our territory is protected by barriers that would turn away any ordinary human long before they reach the inner woods. The fact that you not only penetrated those barriers, but survived a night alone in the deep forest suggests you have abilities you haven't yet learned to access. Darius had remained silent through this exchange, but now he stepped forward. If she's not human, if she has abilities, then she needs to be tested. The pack laws are clear about outsiders with unknown capabilities. The pack laws were written for different times, Marcus replied mildly. But you're right that she'll need to prove herself if she wishes to remain here while we uncover the truth about her identity. Remain here? Evelyn looked between the two men. I never said I wanted to stay. I just want to go home. And where would that be exactly? Darius's voice carried an edge of challenge that made her spine stiffen. You have no memory of your previous life, no identification, no money, no friends or family coming to look for you. The human world would see you as a Jane Doe at best, a mentally unstable woman at worst. Here, at least, we understand what you're going through. The truth of his words stung because she couldn't argue with the logic. She was nobody in the outside world, a person without history or connections. But here, surrounded by impossible creatures in an impossible place, she at least had the promise of answers. What kind of tests? She asked reluctantly. Physical trials to measure your capabilities, Darius explained. Mental exercises to test your resilience and judgment. Cultural integration to see if you can adapt to our ways. Some will be uncomfortable. All will be necessary if you want the pack's protection while Marcus works to uncover your past. Evelyn looked around the room, taking in the carved wolves on the walls, the ancient symbols that seemed to whisper secrets just beyond her understanding, the faces of people who had already made their judgment about her worth. 3 months ago, if someone had told her she'd be negotiating her place among werewolves, she would have recommended they seek professional help. But 3 months ago felt like a lifetime away, and she was no longer the person she'd been then, whoever that person had been. All right, she said finally. I'll take your tests, but I want your word that if I prove myself, you'll help me recover my memories and find out what happened to me. Darius studied her for a long moment, and she caught something in his expression that might have been approval. You have my word, Evelyn. Succeed in the trials, and we'll give you every assistance in uncovering the truth about your identity. As she shook his hand to seal the agreement, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. But what happened in the coming weeks would change not only her understanding of who she was, but the very foundation of everything she thought she knew about the world. The first test came at dawn. Evelyn jolted awake in the small cabin they'd assigned her, her heart hammering from dreams she couldn't quite grasp. Images of running through moonlit forests, of voices calling her name in languages she didn't recognize, of hands reaching for her through shadows that felt more like memory than nightmare. The wooden walls around her seemed to pulse with an energy that made her skin tingle, and she realized with growing certainty that whatever was happening to her was accelerating. A sharp knock on her door interrupted her troubled thoughts. When she opened it, she found a young woman about her own age, with the characteristic golden eyes and graceful bearing of the pack, but something softer in her expression than what she'd seen from the men. I'm Luna, the woman said, offering a small smile. Marcus sent me to prepare you for today's trials. You'll need proper clothing and some understanding of what you're facing. Evelyn gratefully accepted the offered garments, sturdy leather pants, a fitted tunic, and boots that looked like they'd been crafted specifically for her feet. As she dressed, Luna explained what lay ahead. There are 3 traditional trials for outsiders seeking acceptance into the pack. First is the trial of instinct, where you'll be tested on your ability to navigate our territory using senses beyond the ordinary human range. Second is the trial of will, which measures your mental resilience under pressure. The third, Luna hesitated, her expression growing troubled. The trial of truth requires you to allow Marcus to delve deeper into your blocked memories. It's necessary, but it can be intense. Define intense, Evelyn said, lacing up her boots with hands that trembled slightly. Some people don't survive having their mental barriers torn away, not physically, but psychologically. If whatever happened to cause your memory loss was traumatic enough, recovering those memories could shatter your mind completely. The casual way Luna delivered this information sent ice through Evelyn's veins. And if I refuse the third trial, then you'll never know who you really are, and the pack will never fully trust you. You'll live here as a perpetual outsider, tolerated but never truly accepted. Luna placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. But that's still weeks away. Focus on surviving today first. The trial of instinct took place in a section of forest that looked identical to everywhere else, but felt fundamentally different the moment Evelyn stepped into it. The air itself seemed thicker here, charged with an energy that made every hair on her body stand on end. Darius waited for her at the forest's edge, flanked by several pack members who would serve as observers. The trial is simple in concept, he explained, his tone businesslike despite the way his eyes seemed to track her every movement. Navigate to the heart of the testing grounds and retrieve the token hidden there. You have until sunset. No maps, no guides, no assistance of any kind. And if I get lost, then we'll find your body eventually. His smile held no warmth. The testing grounds don't forgive mistakes, Evelyn. They're designed to challenge every sense you possess, and several you probably don't know you have yet. As she entered the forest alone, Evelyn understood what he meant. Within minutes, the normal sounds of woodland life faded to an unnatural silence. The paths seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, and more than once, she found herself walking in circles despite being certain she'd been traveling in a straight line. But something else was happening. Something that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a strange sense of homecoming. Her senses were sharpening beyond anything she'd experienced before. She could smell the difference between trees that looked identical, could hear the whisper of wind through leaves from hundreds of yards away, could feel the vibration of small creatures moving through the earth beneath her feet. When she closed her eyes and simply listened, the forest began to make sense. Not as a random collection of plants and animals, but as a living system with its own rhythm and flow. She could sense the places where the energy moved freely and the spots where it pooled and stagnated. Following those currents like a river, she found herself moving deeper into the woods with increasing confidence. The token, when she finally reached it, was hanging from a tree branch in a small clearing that felt like the eye of a hurricane. Ancient stones formed a perfect circle around the base of the massive oak, and carved into the bark were symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked at them directly. As her fingers closed around the small silver pendant that served as proof of her success, she felt something click into place deep in her mind. For just a moment she remembered. Not everything, not even close to everything, but enough to know that this wasn't the first time she'd stood in this clearing. She'd been here before, younger and terrified, running from something that had meant to destroy her. Someone had helped her then, had given her the means to escape and forget, but the cost had been higher than anyone had anticipated. The memory slipped away before she could grasp it fully, but the knowledge that she had successfully completed the trial in record time remained. When she emerged from the forest as the sun reached its zenith, the pack members waiting for her were staring at her with expressions that ranged from amazement to deep unease. 4 hours, one of them muttered. She did it in 4 hours. The fastest time in living memory was 8. Darius said nothing, but his golden eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Could he sense the change in her? Could he tell that something fundamental had shifted during her time in the testing grounds? "Well done," Marcus said when she presented him with the token. "Though I suspect you found the trial easier than you expected. It was like the forest was guiding me," she admitted, "like it wanted me to succeed." "Interesting and deeply concerning." Marcus's expression grew troubled. "The testing grounds are designed to be hostile to anyone without pack blood. They should have fought you every step of the way. Instead, they welcomed you home." That night, they celebrated her success with a feast that filled the main hall with the scent of roasted meat and fermented fruit wine. Evelyn found herself seated at the high table between Marcus and Darius, a position of honor that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The pack members who had seemed suspicious of her that morning now looked at her with something approaching respect, though she caught several conversations that stopped abruptly when she walked past. "You're adapting quickly," Darius observed, refilling her cup with wine that tasted like liquid starlight. "Most outsiders need weeks to feel comfortable in our community." "Maybe I'm not as much of an outsider as everyone assumed," she replied, the wine making her bolder than usual. "Maybe not." His hand brushed hers as he set the cup down, and she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the supernatural energy that permeated this place. But that raises questions that might be more dangerous than ignorance. Before she could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted near the hall's entrance. A young pack member, barely more than a teenager, stumbled through the doors with blood streaming from claw marks across his chest. Luna rushed to his side, but even from across the room, Evelyn could see that his injuries were severe. "Hunters!" the boy gasped out between labored breaths. 3 miles north. They have silver weapons and some kind of tracking device. They're moving toward the settlement." The celebratory atmosphere evaporated instantly. Darius was on his feet before the words had fully left the boy's mouth, his entire demeanor shifting from relaxed host to lethal predator in the space of a heartbeat. "How many?" he demanded. "At least a dozen, maybe more. They move like military, not like the usual treasure hunters who stumble into our territory." Marcus rose slowly from his chair, his age showing for the first time since Evelyn had met him. "Organized hunters haven't been seen in this region for over 30 years. Their return now, so soon after Evelyn's arrival, cannot be coincidence." All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their suspicion like a physical force. "I didn't lead them here," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I don't even know who I am, let alone how to contact hunters. Intentionally or not, your presence here has upset the balance," Darius said, his tone carefully neutral. "The question is whether you're the cause of this threat or the key to stopping it." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the pack prepared for potential siege. Weapons that had been ceremonial decorations were taken down from walls and sharpened to deadly edges. Children and elderly pack members were moved to secure locations deeper in the settlement. Scouts were dispatched to track the hunters' movements and report back on their capabilities. Evelyn found herself assigned to help Luna prepare medical supplies, a task that should have been simple but became complicated when she began instinctively knowing which herbs would be most effective for treating silver poisoning, which compounds would accelerate the healing of supernatural creatures, and which ritual words needed to be spoken while preparing the medicines. "How do you know that?" Luna asked after Evelyn correctly identified a plant that looked nearly identical to 3 others in the storage room. "I don't know. The information just appears when I need it." Evelyn stared at the herb in her hands, trying to remember where she might have learned such specialized knowledge. "It's like there's another person living in my head, someone who understands your world better than I do. Or someone who used to live in your world," Luna said quietly. "Evelyn, what if you didn't lose your memories? What if someone else's memories were suppressed to make room for a false identity?" The suggestion sent chills through her entire body because it felt true in a way that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. What if Evelyn wasn't even her real name? What if the person she thought she was had been constructed from nothing, an elaborate fiction designed to hide someone else entirely? A sharp whistle from outside interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The hunters had been spotted less than a mile from the settlement's outer perimeter, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested extensive training in supernatural warfare. Darius appeared in the doorway of the medical supply room, his expression grim. "They're not here by accident," he reported. "Our scouts identified military-grade equipment, weapons specifically designed to kill shapeshifters, and tracking devices that seem to be locked onto something inside our territory. Something or someone." "Me," Evelyn said, the certainty hitting her like a physical blow. "They're tracking me. That would be my assessment as well. Which means you have a choice to make." Darius stepped fully into the room, his presence seeming to fill the space with dangerous energy. "You can leave now, draw them away from innocent people, and face whatever they want with you alone. Or you can stay and help us fight them, knowing that your presence here puts every member of this pack at risk." "That's not much of a choice." "No, it isn't." His golden eyes softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, I'd rather have you fighting beside us than running into the night. Your instincts during the trial suggest you have abilities that could tip the balance in our favor." The sound of approaching engines cut through the night air, followed by the distant baying of hounds trained to hunt supernatural prey. The hunters had found them, and there was no more time for debate or preparation. Whatever choice Evelyn made would determine not only her own fate, but the survival of everyone who had shown her kindness in her darkest hour. "I'm staying," she said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "If they're here because of me, then I have a responsibility to help protect you." Darius nodded once, sharp and approving. "Then we fight together. But understand this, Evelyn. When this night is over, if we survive, there will be no more hiding from the truth about who you really are. The hunter's arrival proves that your past is catching up with you, whether you want it to or not." As they moved toward the settlement's defensive positions, Evelyn felt something stirring deep inside her consciousness. Memories that weren't quite memories, instincts that belonged to someone she couldn't remember being, and a growing certainty that the real battle wasn't just beginning tonight. It had been going on for years, and she was finally ready to stop running from it. The first silver bullets shattered against the settlement's protective barriers just as the moon reached its zenith, and Evelyn discovered that some knowledge was too dangerous to forget, no matter how much it hurt to remember. But the pain of truth was nothing compared to the fury that filled her when she saw the hunters' weapons trained on people who had offered her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go. For the first time since waking in the forest, she felt truly, completely awake, and she was done being afraid. The first hunter to breach the settlement's defenses died before he could fire a second shot. Evelyn moved faster than thought, her body responding to instincts she didn't remember possessing. The silver-loaded crossbow bolt that had been aimed at Luna's heart instead embedded itself harmlessly in a wooden beam as Evelyn's hand closed around the hunter's throat. The satisfying crack of breaking bone echoed through the night air, followed by his body hitting the ground with a wet thud. "Impossible," she whispered, staring at her own hands in shock. She'd never killed anyone before, had she? The certainty that she had done exactly this many times before crashed through her consciousness like a tidal wave, bringing with it fragments of memory that made her stagger. Blood. So much blood. Her own hands, younger but just as deadly, ending lives to protect people she loved. A man's voice screaming her name, not Evelyn, but something else, something that tasted like power and prophecy on her tongue. And running, always running, from hunters who would never stop, never give up, never rest until she was dead. Seraphina. The name fell from Darius's lips like a prayer and a curse combined. He stood frozen in his partial transformation, golden eyes wide with recognition and something that might have been terror. "You're Seraphina Nightbane, the lost Alpha, the one who broke the covenant 30 years ago." The sound of her true name shattered the last barriers in her mind like glass. Everything came flooding back at once. Not Evelyn, the lost human, but Seraphina, daughter of the most powerful Alpha bloodline in North America. The woman who had discovered the Covenant Council's plan to betray every pact to the Hunters in exchange for personal immunity. The one who had stolen the evidence and tried to warn the other Alphas, only to be branded a traitor and marked for death by her own people. She remembered Marcus not as an elder of this pack, but as her father's oldest friend, the man who had helped her escape when the assassination attempt failed. The spell that had given her a human identity and human memories designed to last only until she was strong enough to reclaim her birthright. The years of hiding, of living as someone else entirely, while the supernatural world burned around her, and she remembered why the Hunters had found her now. "The Covenant is broken," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made several pack members instinctively bow their heads. "The Council is dead. I made sure of that before I went into hiding." "Then why are the Hunters here?" Darius demanded, though his tone had shifted to one of respect mixed with wariness. An Alpha addressing another Alpha, not a pack leader questioning an outsider. "Because someone survived. Someone who knows who I really am and wants me dead badly enough to hire military contractors." She looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing them with new eyes. Not just any pack, but the descendants of her father's allies, the ones who had chosen exile rather than serve the corrupted Covenant. "They are not here to capture me. They're here to finish what started 30 years ago." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and the acrid smell of silver smoke began filtering through the air. The Hunters weren't just armed with conventional weapons. They had industrial equipment designed to poison the very air that shapeshifters breathed. "How many?" Marcus appeared at her side, and she could see recognition dawning in his golden eyes as well. "How many Hunters did the survivor hire?" Seraphina closed her eyes and reached out with senses that had been dormant for 3 decades. The forest whispered its secrets to her, revealing numbers, positions, weaknesses. 47 humans, 12 vehicles. Enough silver ammunition to kill everyone in this settlement 10 times over. She opened her eyes, meeting Marcus's gaze with grim determination. But they made one crucial mistake, which is, they assumed I was still hiding. The transformation that overtook her was unlike anything the pack had ever witnessed. Not the smooth shift from human to wolf that they were accustomed to, but something far more primal and terrifying. Her human form dissolved into shadow and moonlight, reforming into something that was part wolf, part elemental force, and entirely lethal. The lost Alpha had awakened, and she was done running. The battle that followed would be sung about in pack territories for generations to come. Seraphina moved through the Hunters' ranks like vengeance given form, her very presence disrupting their equipment and turning their weapons against them. Silver bullets that should have found their marks instead curved away from their targets. Tracking devices exploded in showers of sparks. Communications equipment shrieked feedback until the operators ripped their headsets off in agony. But it was when the Hunters brought out their secret weapon that the true scope of her power became clear. "Alpha Nightbane," a voice called through an electronic amplifier, speaking her name with the kind of familiarity that sent ice through her veins. "I know you can hear me. Come out and face me like you should have 30 years ago." The man who stepped into the settlement's central square was someone she had hoped never to see again. Tall and lean with silver hair and eyes like chips of winter sky. He wore the black tactical gear of the Hunters, but moved with the predatory grace of something supernatural. The scent that reached her nose confirmed her worst fears. "Hello, sister," Jonathan Nightbane said, his smile cold as Arctic wind. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually track down the woman who murdered our father? The accusation hit her like a physical blow, not because it was false, but because it was technically true. She had killed their father, the Alpha who had been willing to sacrifice every shapeshifter in North America to maintain his own power. But Jonathan had never cared about the greater good, only about his own advancement through the pack hierarchy. "You were supposed to be dead," she said, stepping fully into the moonlight so he could see exactly what she had become. "I made sure of that when I brought down the Covenant compound. You made sure I was trapped under several tons of rubble with extensive burns and no memory of how I'd survived. It took me 25 years to heal completely and another 5 to piece together what really happened that night." His smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp to be entirely human. "But I never stopped hunting you, dear sister. Even when I thought you were dead, I kept searching for any trace of your bloodline. And you found the hunters willing to work with a rogue shapeshifter in exchange for delivering me. Oh, these aren't ordinary hunters. They're part of a new organization, one dedicated to creating a world where only the strongest supernatural creatures survive. No more hiding, no more pretending to be human, no more covenant treaties limiting our potential." Jonathan spread his arms wide, encompassing the destruction around them. A world where alphas like us rule openly, without having to consider the weak or the frightened. The ideology was seductive, she had to admit. How many times had she dreamed of a world where shapeshifters didn't have to hide their true nature? But she'd learned the hard way that power without compassion led only to corruption and cruelty. And to create this new world, you need to eliminate anyone who might oppose you. Starting with the Lost Alpha, who already proved she could bring down the old order. Exactly. Jonathan's form began to shift, revealing the truth she should have suspected from the moment she smelled his scent. He wasn't just a shapeshifter anymore. Whatever he'd done to survive the compound's collapse had changed him into something else entirely. Something that combined the worst aspects of every supernatural creature she'd ever encountered. Though I have to admit, I'm curious to see how much power you've retained after 30 years of playing human. The fight between them lasted less than 5 minutes and felt like an eternity. Jonathan was strong, faster than any shapeshifter had a right to be, and completely without mercy. But he had made the mistake of believing that hiding had made her weak, that years of suppressed memories had dulled her instincts. Instead, the forced restraint had acted like a dam, building pressure until the moment it finally broke and released everything at once. When she tore out his throat with claws that burned like silver fire, the remaining hunters fled into the night without looking back. Some battles couldn't be won, and they were smart enough to recognize one when they saw it. In the silence that followed, Serafina found herself surrounded by pack members who looked at her with expressions ranging from awe to uncertainty. She was no longer the mysterious outsider they'd agreed to help, but one of the most powerful supernatural beings alive, with a reputation that preceded her by decades. "So," Darius said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "what happens now?" It was Marcus who answered. "Now we have a choice. We can go back to hiding, pretending that tonight never happened, hoping that no other enemies come looking for revenge or power. Or we can accept that the old world is ending and start building something better." Serafina looked around at the faces of people who had become more than allies over the past few months. They had become family, the thing she'd never thought she would have again after losing everything to the Covenant's betrayal. "The choice isn't mine alone to make," she said, allowing her form to shift back to something resembling the human woman they'd known as Evelyn, though she could never truly be that person again. "I won't force anyone to follow me into an uncertain future." "You're not forcing anyone," Luna said, stepping forward with her chin raised in defiance of protocol. "We're choosing, all of us." One by one, the pack members voiced their agreement. Not because they were compelled by alpha dominance or ancient laws, but because they had seen what she was willing to sacrifice to protect them. Trust given freely was worth more than any amount of political power. As the dawn light began to filter through the trees, Darius approached her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The events of the night had changed everything between them, but she couldn't tell if that change was for better or worse. "Seraphina Nightbane," he said formally. "I, Darius Thornfield, Alpha of the Northern Mountain Pack, formally recognize your claim to leadership and offer my pack's allegiance to your cause." The words were a political formula, but the look in his eyes was anything but formal. When he took her hands in his, she felt the same electric connection that had sparked between them from their first meeting, but deeper now, more certain. "I'm not the same woman who disappeared 30 years ago," she warned him, "and I'm definitely not the lost human you agreed to help. If you're offering what I think you're offering, you need to understand that there's no going back to the simple life you had before." "I stopped wanting a simple life the moment you walked into that forest," he replied, his thumbs tracing circles over her knuckles. "Besides, someone needs to keep the lost Alpha from getting too lost in her own power. Is that what you're volunteering for? Keeping me grounded?" Among other things, his smile held promises that made heat pool in her belly despite everything they'd just been through. "If you'll have me." Her answer was a kiss that tasted like moonlight and possibility, fierce enough to communicate everything that words couldn't capture. Around them, the pack began the work of rebuilding. But for this moment, the rest of the world could wait. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Marcus cleared his throat from somewhere behind them. "As touching as this is, we have practical matters to discuss. Word of tonight's battle will spread quickly through the supernatural community. We need to be prepared for the responses, both positive and negative." "Let them come," Seraphina said, not taking her eyes off Darius's face. "I spent 30 years hiding from my responsibilities, from my power, from the possibility of love. I'm done running from anything, even if it means war with the remaining Covenant loyalists, especially if it means that." She turned to address the assembled pack, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to lead. "The old ways are dying. We can either help guide that death and birth something better from the ashes, or we can cling to the past until it drags us down with it. I know which choice I'm making." The sun crested the horizon as she spoke, painting the settlement in shades of gold and amber that made everything look like it had been touched by magic. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of other packs beginning to stir, waking to a world that had been fundamentally changed by the events of the night. There would be challenges ahead, enemies to face, alliances to forge, and an entirely new way of life to build from the ground up. But for the first time in 30 years, Seraphina felt ready for whatever came next. She was no longer lost, no longer hiding, and no longer alone. She was exactly who she was meant to be, in exactly the place she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to love. And that was enough to face anything the world could throw at them. As the pack began preparations for the new day, Darius caught her hand and pulled her aside for a moment of privacy. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only one," she replied, reaching up to cup his face in her palm. "That it took me 30 years to find my way home to you. Maybe you needed those 30 years to become who you are now. Maybe we both did." She considered this as she watched the sun paint the forest in shades of gold and green, transforming the battlefield from a place of violence into something beautiful and hopeful. "Maybe you're right," she said finally, "but no more waiting, no more hiding. Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," he agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss that lasted until the rest of the world demanded their attention once again. The lost Alpha had finally come home, and nothing would ever be the same.